Welcome everyone today to the How to Choose a Graduate Advisor webinar. We're really excited to put this on. I think it's a hugely important topic, and we have a few really great panelists here today. My name is Anna McCready. I work at the Berkeley International Office, and I'm an International Student Advisor there. And we also have a few different UC Berkeley alumni who are here today to be as panelists and discuss the different topics on how to choose an advisor. And that is Jerry Tai, Mark Borja, and Job Chakarawat. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're really excited to hear from them in just a little bit. If you guys want to maybe introduce yourself just really quick, say who you are, and introduce yourself to the attendees.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Jerry Tai. I got my PhD in electrical engineering. I came to Berkeley in 2015 and I just finished my degree. So happy to share my experience with you.
Job, you go first.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Job. I just finished my PhD also from a chemistry program. So I entered Berkeley in 2015 and I just finished in 2020.
Hi, my name is Mark Borja. So I graduated from Berkeley in 2005. That was my bachelor's degree in molecular and cell biology. And then I did my PhD at UCSF in the chemistry and chemical biology program. I graduated from there in 2011, and I am now an assistant professor at CSU East Bay in Hayward in the chemistry and biochemistry department.
Great, thank you all for the introduction. We'll be hearing more from these panelists later during the Q&A session, so stay tuned for that. So now we're going to go ahead and start the webinar. As I mentioned, it's being recorded. I've already seen a question about the recording, so this will be posted. It will be emailed out to anyone who registered for this webinar, as well as likely posted on our website and YouTube channel. So you can definitely find the content afterward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this part of the webinar is pre-recorded. So as I said, we won't be answering questions during this section, but feel free to add in your questions as we go along, and we'll take the live questions during the Q&A right after this. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on choosing an advisor. I hope you are all enjoying the semester so far. You might be wondering how much difference it will make if you can make a good decision about choosing your advisor. So today I want to convince you that it is not only important, but also there are steps you can take to make a wise choice. So briefly introducing ourselves, I'm Jerry Tai. I recently got my PhD in electrical engineering and computer sciences. And joining with me today are Dr. Job Chakarawat and Professor Mark Borja. So you can see that we are all Berkeley alumni. We want you to succeed in grad school. And a big part of becoming successful in grad school involves choosing a good academic advisor. So this is what we will be talking about today. I will split today's talk into two major parts. First is advisor selection. Some questions that we will ask include, what are some concrete criteria that we can look for? And what are some ways we can do to find out? Secondly, we will have a panel discussion. We begin with answering some frequently asked questions, and then you will have the opportunity to raise your questions as well. From my experience and the experiences of many people, it's perhaps one of the most important decisions you will make in grad school. Even more, some students may choose advisors over schools. You know, having a good advisor can not only influence your overall grad school experience, but also potentially change the outcome of your grad program. Since this is especially going to be important for a PhD program, we want to share our experiences with you. The goal of our topic today is to find the right match of advisor. Here are a few things that you will be looking at. For instance, the time it takes for people to finish grad school. You know, it can range from as fast as 3.5 years to maybe 10 years or 11 years or more. We will also talk about advisor's management style. Typically, we can categorize it into hands-on versus hands-off, meeting frequency and advisor's availability, And then we can look at lab environment, funding, publications, also alumni destinations are something that we can look for as well. One thing that we should consider is how long it takes to graduate. For Berkeley PhD programs, on average is about 6 years. Some people finish earlier, perhaps in 3.5 years, and some people take their time. It can be as long as 10 years. So when I was choosing a lab, I wanted one that I could graduate from within 5 or 6 years. When a PhD program takes a long time to finish, you might want to ask the reasons behind it. Does the professor have expectations that are difficult to achieve? Does the research group have a competitive or collaborative environment? So the average time for graduation not only helps you consider whether you want to spend that amount of time in grad school, but also tells you that there are perhaps areas about the group that you can try to figure out. Now let's talk about advisor. What kind of management style does the professor have? For instance, professors who are hands-on tend to be more details-oriented. They may want to check in with you every day or every few days. They may want to know how you do experiments. So this approach can be good and bad. On one hand, if your advisor is hands-on, you will be pretty much on track to finishing your degree and making sure that your research will have a decent impact. However, this kind of management style may not be suitable for everyone. Some people may have more motivation and creativity when they are not given much instruction. On the other hand, a hands-off advisor will give you much more freedom. The frequency at which you meet your advisor also matters. Some professors meet you only once per month, and some may see you multiple times a week or even daily. My advisor kind of adopts a hybrid approach. In the first 2 or 3 years, he was hands-on to make sure that our research was on the right track for us to publish our results and pass our qualifying exams. And then in the last 2 years, he only met me once every month or so, because he knew that I could make good decisions on what to do next. So that is my personal story. And eventually you do have to decide yourself what kind of model works best for you. And then lab environments can also vary a lot between different research groups. In some groups, people work on individual projects, and in other groups, you will be working with a subset of your group members. You can imagine that if you're working by yourself on a project or a few projects, it can be pretty challenging. It will actually be mutually beneficial if you work in a team. One example from my lab is that each person owns a project, so you will be the lead. But then the culture in our lab is that you are trying to help each other, and you become co-authors when you publish papers, and also when your lab mates publish papers. Sometimes I may be doing experiments that are out of my expertise, but with the help of my lab mates, I can get things done in one day as opposed to perhaps a week or longer. The next thing I want to discuss is funding. At Berkeley, we have grad student researcher, GSR, grad student instructor, GSI, and some people, they get internal or external fellowships. So you might want to ask the professors and current lab members what kind of funding is available. For some groups, the professors may have a lot of research grants, so you can be a GSR and do not have to teach classes. But for some groups, you do have to work as a GSI. Though this can also be useful experience if you are thinking about a career as a professor or a teaching job. So this is an area that you can figure out prior to committing to a research group. The last point on my list is publications and alumni destinations. By directly looking at the destinations of group alumni, you can gauge the outcome of working in a lab. Imagine yourself going through 6 years of a program. What kind of expectation do you have? And do most people publish papers? And do most people in your group end up becoming professors or working in industries? Even though you are not restricted to what your group alumni do, this information can still be valuable. After talking about all the important criteria, one question that many of you might be wondering is, what should I do? How do I actually find out about labs and advisors? So I will walk us through a few techniques that I have tried in the past. Scenario number one, suppose you just got your admission letter or you are still on your summer vacation, or you are off campus for some reason, or you want to find out more about labs and advisors, one thing that I have tried before is to contact people by email. Back in 2015, I just finished college and I had not arrived at Berkeley yet. So I looked up some research groups that I was interested in and started contacting group members. Initially, I wasn't sure how much people would tell me, but then based on my experience, I learned that most students and postdocs were quite direct in sharing their observations and experiences. I started by introducing who I am, and I listed out a few questions I had in bullet points. For instance, I asked about the lab culture, I asked about the funding, advisor's style. In a simple and polite email, you can actually get a lot of information about a research group. In my example, a student called John actually responded to me. He introduced different research topics within the group. He told me that in his lab, projects are driven by individuals, but people work collaboratively. An advisor allows considerable freedom for each student. And finally, the lab culture is great. And in a second scenario where you are actually on campus, it's best to see if you can possibly meet up with the professors and research group members. You can email them for an appointment. Sometimes it works pretty well if you take grad students out for lunch. I try to meet up with grad students on campus at the dining hall, and that really helped because often they were able to share their perspectives that may not be easy to share over an email. So moving on to the second part of today's talk, we want to answer some common questions that people may have. And here are a few examples. Some tips for us. Take your time to figure out if a lab is the right fit for you. If you can have a good and a wise decision, even if it takes you longer to decide, it's going to be far better than trying to secure a position fast and possibly regret it later. Also, talk to multiple students, postdocs, and professors. It's good to have different opinions, and then at the end of the day, you can combine all the information to make a better decision. What I did was to try to imagine myself working in this research group and environment. Do you feel motivated and happy? And how closely does working in this group lead you to the final goal? Question number 2, should I do a lab rotation? In some schools or departments, you are actually required or highly encouraged to do lab rotations. Even if that's not the case, it's something that people will do, and you can think about if that fits you. Some advantages include more options and time to think about if the research group is a good match for you. Also, it gives you more opportunities to learn skills and give you some room to change your mind. Some disadvantages. If you are on rotation, you may have to motivate yourself. Otherwise, you can potentially be less involved in research. Also, each time after you switch your lab, you will have to start many things over again. So there is no absolute good or bad in this scenario, but it's something that you can consider. Question 3, is there room for negotiation? When people have jobs, they tend to talk about negotiation, and in a similar way, we can negotiate before we begin our grad programs. For instance, the starting date of your appointment. In my case, I wanted to start early, so I emailed my professor to see if he had the capacity to get me involved as early as July. And I also know people who wanted to delay because of family or personal reasons. Potentially, you can also discuss your monthly stipends. I know a friend who negotiated for a higher salary, and the professor eventually agreed. Research topics too. Sometimes, depending on the research grant, you can always ask and express your interest in particular subject areas. Then summer internships. Some professor may not like or allow you to do an internship. So you can find out about this as well. One last point, you can ask about conference opportunities. Some professors may support you to go to conferences. And the last question on my slide is about how you can get an accurate picture at the end of the day. From my experience, students are generally direct and honest about giving you their answers. If you ask them questions, and from talking to professors directly, you can also have a good understanding about the research group. And then definitely consult people who are older or senior in a research group, or even people who have graduated because they are the ones who have been through the grad programs. And now I want to switch gears to talk about information specific to international students. As we know, because of the current policies, many of us international students are not able to physically come to the Berkeley campus. Besides the common challenges that international students face, the current situation makes finding an advisor much more challenging. So you might ask, first, what are some ways that I can do to get to know my professors and lab mates? And second, since it's much more difficult to perform hands-on experiments, how can we still make research progresses? Personally, I have experienced part of shelter-in-place when it first began. Even though that made it much more difficult to communicate with my advisor and lab mates, I realized that there are steps we could take. For instance, I wrote down all the questions I wanted to ask my advisor, and when I got a chance to ask him once per week, I could ask him all of my questions in the meeting. And right now, I know a lot of labs require researchers to take turns working in a lab. In this case, you can plan ahead of time, so that when you actually have to go into the lab, you can start your experiments right away. And finally, as an international student, you will need to register for at least 12 units every semester in order to be in a good academic standing. Make sure that you communicate this with your advisor early on in case you need to register for 12 research units. And now I want to discuss a few approaches you can take or consider, given the current pandemic. Some options may include taking the first semester to do lab rotations before you meet lab members in person and commit to a lab. In each rotation, keep up with good professional relationships with the advisor and also the lab mates. You can also consider taking this semester to finish more coursework, collaborate with your classmates on potential projects, and participate in a few lab meetings and seminars. And finally, working in a different time zone can be challenging. If you are working from abroad, let your advisor know so that he or she understands your working hours. It's important that you need to have a discipline to keep up with research and coursework. So one thing I tried was to use Google Calendar to remind me of important events. Last semester, I was working on my research from Taiwan. I basically follow the schedule in Asia, but I set up reminders to attend a few necessary meetings throughout the week. On some days, I had to wake up a bit early to also go to sleep a little bit later. But in general, I think everything went pretty okay. So just to conclude, here are a few things to consider when you look for an advisor. Some concrete things that you can look for include research funding, field of interest, alumni destinations, publications, and so on. And some relational aspects may be lab atmosphere, advisors' expectations, student-faculty dynamics. And one key point here is that you can adapt and change according to your situation. It's okay to take your time. And last slide, you are welcome to connect with us. Feel free to add us on LinkedIn or social media for any additional questions you may have. So that's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jerry. So we have a lot of helpful information right there. We tried to keep it kind of short and sweet so that we had plenty of time for questions after. And I just want to give a quick overview of, as a Berkeley International Office, International Student Advisor, kind of what we see with graduate students and advisors and what sort of issues might commonly come up. So in terms of choosing an advisor, that does have a huge impact on your long-term success as an international student here at UC Berkeley. It can make a really big difference, not necessarily that you find a good advisor, but you find a good fit for your advisor. And even if it's a great advisor, and even if you're a great graduate student, it might not be the perfect fit in terms of your styles, your communication. So it's critical to find an advisor that's the right fit for you. And it's also critical to have really good communication with your advisor, whatever that fit may be. So in terms of my work, when graduate students come in with issues, especially academically, oftentimes we see that it's due to difficulty with the advisor and miscommunication. So either the student is struggling academically and they can't get good guidance from their advisor, so they can't really get themselves out of that hole. Or the bad communication with their advisor can lead to academic difficulties. So it can be very, very crucial to have a good advisor who can help you through academic difficulties when you are in them, as well as to be a good guide so that you don't get into those academic difficulties in the first place. And on the other side of things, strong faculty support we have seen has helped get students out of really, really difficult times. If you have strong faculty support, it can be hugely important, not only with academic difficulties, but with personal issues and so many other really important areas. So getting that strong faculty support, having a really strong connection and relationship with your advisor is really important to graduate student success. Some really important points that I want to bring up is, I cannot emphasize this enough, but communicate well, communicate often, and communicate early. So be sure that you're in really good, strong communication with your advisor, and also that you understand their communication style. And this is something that comes up really often with not only international students, but other domestic students as well. There's a lot of different communication styles for individuals, and you want to know how your advisor likes to communicate, what their style is, whether it's direct or indirect, how often they like to be contacted. That's all really important for establishing strong communication with them and having a good relationship. So it's good to kind of feel out what their communication style is early on so that you can know going in. You can set some guidelines for how often they like to be communicated with and that sort of information. And it can also be really helpful to attend if there's any seminars you see or webinars on intercultural communication. That can be very helpful as well, especially for different countries' communication styles that can really vary widely in terms of cultural differences. For example, one really common cultural thing in America is the compliment sandwich. So that is where someone will say a compliment about something of your work, and then they will give the criticism or suggestions, and then they'll give another compliment. So a lot of students, myself included, sometimes will think that, oh, they're giving so many compliments, they must love this piece of work, when really the compliment sandwich is kind of to soften the criticism in the middle, which is what they're trying to get at. So there's all these sorts of different communication styles, and being familiar with American communication styles can be really helpful. Another piece of advice is to start early if you are having problem and to seek support. So if you start having any sort of small issues with your advisor, any sort of communication issues where they're not answering your emails, it's good to start early on and communicate with them so that it doesn't snowball into a bigger issue. It's good to communicate with other offices, so you can absolutely come to Berkeley International Office to talk with us. If we can't solve the issue, we can direct you to the correct resource who can. It's good to be in contact with your GSAO because they can often act as a mediator or a resource to this, and it's good to seek these options early on. Another really good resource is the Student Ombuds Office. This is the best place to go if you're having real difficulty with your advisor. They can help coach you as well as coach the advisor. They can help facilitate communication. So the Student Ombuds Office is a really excellent resource if you're starting to have issues. So reach out to these options early on. A lot of times we have students coming to us or one of these other offices once they are really deep into an issue, and it's kind of an irreparable relationship. So it's good to start, even if you're having kind of small issues, reach out, get support, and resolve them before they keep going on and on into a much bigger issue. And the third piece of advice is that, I mentioned this earlier, but a mismatch doesn't mean that you or they are in the wrong. It doesn't mean that one of you is not good at what you are doing or good at your job. It just means that you have different styles, different expectations, and it may be worth it to try to change advisors or find one who is a better fit. So again, you want to be thinking early on about that fit and that if there may be a mismatch. But if you do find a mismatch later on, then you can think about changing advisors as well. So in terms of our office, we are an immigration office, so we primarily handle immigration items. But if you are having issues with an advisor or you're wanting help choosing an advisor, then you can absolutely come to us, discuss it, and we can direct you to correct resources or hopefully help you out as well. So now I'm going to open this up to the Q&A portion. We saved about 15 minutes for this, so should have hopefully a time to answer a few different questions. So I will just be going through the chat now. You can continue to add questions through the chat as we go along and directing questions to our panelists. Okay. There is a question about lab rotations. So for lab rotations, can these happen in different colleges, or are they limited to your college? Should you be doing lab rotations in only your college?
You can actually do lab rotations across colleges. This at least holds true for certain science disciplines. So for example, you can do let's say you're in the College of Chemistry and you want to do a rotation with somebody who is in the College of Letters and Science, who is a professor in molecular and cell biology. As long as that fits with, you know, the program of study that you want to do, that's generally allowable. I personally know at least one person, more than one person, who has done something like that. I have a friend who actually works, his lab is in the School of Public Health, but he's actually a physics major because the professor does interdisciplinary research. So that is definitely possible.
Great, I think that answered the question fully. There's another really great question about COVID-19. Obviously, this is a huge change for the university, lots of big changes going on. Are there any big differences you could see to choosing an advisor in regards to the impacts of COVID-19? So Jerry, you talked a little bit about how to find a good fit for an advisor from a distance and starting with emails. Are there any other piece of advice or any other big changes that you think students should be aware of?
So yeah, for chemistry department where I am in, I know that they try to organize like meet and greet time, where the department set up a time, assume that you can zoom in to meet the lab members, and you can try to look for that for other departments as well. That's one thing that the chemistry department is trying to do to facilitate you to be able to meet the lab members. Yeah, but I'm not sure about other departments.
Jerry, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, but I have some ideas.
Oh yeah, I don't have any more, but you can add.
Okay. I think actually the process of choosing an advisor in the COVID-19 era is going to be similar, with the one caveat that a lot more of it's going to be done online. So just to give you some picture of how I went about choosing an advisor, before I came to UCSF, I had looked up all of the advisors who were available for chemistry and chemical biology students to work with. And it actually, by the time I got there, I realized that there were way more, because the chemistry and chemical biology program you can actually work with professors all across UCSF. It's interdisciplinary like that. But I had made up a list of professors that I wanted to potentially rotate with. And so I started out with a professor whose research was similar to what I had been doing when I was an undergrad. And so I kind of went in there sight unseen. And then during my time rotating in that lab, it allowed me to interact with more faculty and find out more about their research. And so one of the professors I worked with was another one who was on my short list, but I made the decision to go with him because I kind of interacted with him through an interview, actually, that was really positive. And then the third one was actually the one I ended up choosing, which I didn't expect. I had that professor for a class, and I got to know him through that class. And I think, you know, we will all have classes. They will be on Zoom, but I think that doesn't preclude interacting with the professors and finding out more about them. The main difference will be that a lot of the communication will be through email or Zoom rather than directly in person.
Great, thank you all for sharing that. There's another question. Is it common for advisors to allow for summer internships during the 5 years of the PhD? And this is looking at the biology field in particular, but I think it's helpful for any of the fields if internships are common.
I can speak to that again. The answer is, while it's less common, it's not terribly uncommon. So you just have to inquire, and generally the answer is yes. I know of several cases where people did that. I don't recall anyone hearing no as an answer, actually.
Yeah, it's certainly more common for engineering fields like computer science. Students do internship all the time. For science, it's less common. For me, I know one of my lab mates did chemical engineering internship. Yeah, but it's less common, so it's something that you can ask your future lab mates or your advisor as well.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, you know, just make sure that if you want to do something like that, you want to be in communication with your advisor well in advance of deciding to do that, because I think generally they would be open to it. They, you know, they know that if you're doing an internship, you're probably interested in industry, and most advisors would support that.
Great, thank you. It looks like we've answered all the questions so far, so we'll wait just a few minutes to see if there are any last few questions about choosing an advisor. Otherwise, we may have answered all the questions proactively.
If people have questions afterwards, you are also welcome to add us on LinkedIn. You can search us up, and we are happy to talk to you more afterwards as well.
Great, thanks, Jerry. All right, well, it looks like we answered all the questions. I think we're going to close just maybe asking the panelists to share one piece of advice about either starting graduate studies or choosing an advisor here at UC Berkeley. If you guys have just any last piece of wisdom or words of advice, feel free to share it now, and then we'll wrap things up.
Can I just ask a question?
You sure can.
Okay, so should I concern that, so when I choose the advisor, so what's the relation? So currently I have 2 main advisors, so but I need to find another additional 3 advisors. Should I concern the relationships between my current main advisors and the advisors I'm potentially to choose?
Are you talking about doing a rotation? I think you were the one who asked the rotation question.
Yeah, so I'm considering, so that is one option. But another one is if I'm satisfied with my current lab, but I want to choose additional advisors, should I concern what's the relationship between them? Because, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is yes. So you want to make sure that at least the advisors, I mean, they don't necessarily have to be working directly with each other, but you know, once they have you in their lab, they will be in some way working directly with each other. So you do want to consider how that's going to work. And I would say that you don't want to have more than 2 advisors. So in your case, what I would encourage you to do at the outset, if you have the opportunity to do it, is do a rotation where you spend time, like a couple, maybe 3 months, in each of those people who you're interested in having as your advisor. I think you said you're doing 3 rotations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would actually spend time where you're only focusing on those, one lab at a time, so that you kind of get to know the people and your advisor and the research style and the kind of research that you'll be doing. And then, once you're, like, let's say halfway through your 3rd rotation, then you would kind of start making your decision. Do I want to work with, 2 of these or just 1?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want to create a recipe for stressing yourself out.
Uh-huh.
Because you're going to be stressed enough in your first year, I think.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
understand. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that advice, Mark. Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, then we'll just close with one piece of advice and end the webinar.
Sure, how about you go first?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess for me, to have a community of people, friends, are important, because grad school is not easy. So for me, I failed my first year of project. So after doing research for 1 year, I wasn't able to publish my results because of some conflicts in the lab. Thankfully, I had a lot of friends, and that really carried me through that difficult time. So it's a long journey. So make sure you have friends, in grad school.
For me, I would say ask for help. And I know, because personally, I was doing everything pretty well, so I don't like asking for help that much. But yeah, when you run into problem, or like having relational issue with your advisor, you might want to get out of that just that picture of just you and advisor, and look for help from other people. And this also applies not only to relationship with your advisor, but anything in grad school. If you run into problem you don't know how to solve, you just talk to people, reach out to people who know more.
So my piece of advice might be kind of interesting, but which is think about more than just the research that the advisor is doing, but kind of try and find out what they're like as a real person. When I was doing my rotations, one of the things that I discovered about one of the professors I was rotating with was, he wasn't the easiest person to work with. He was very intense, expected a lot, expected long hours. And I didn't see that without doing the rotation. And then the professor I ended up working with, his research was not quite as interesting to me as what I was doing with the other professor. But one thing I found out about him is he had young kids, and that made the way that he interacted with people a lot different. Like he thought about, how he came off to his students, and it's kind of funny to say, but he was kind of more of a fatherly figure. And so even though he was also a young assistant professor, that really made a difference. And so I realized after rotating with him for, about a month and a half, this is the guy I want to work with. And I think it was the right decision. And so what happened was, usually you think about, warming up to the research, or you're interested in the research, but instead I warmed up to the person and then warmed up to the research later. And I think that was actually really valuable for me. Now it turns out, now I have young kids, I'm an assistant professor, and I think about, the professor that I had, the PI that I had in grad school, and, wanting to, emulate what he did. So think about that. I think it's really important.
Wonderful. I think that was great advice for everyone. Thank you everyone so much for taking the time to attend today. I know you're probably facing a lot of Zoom hours right now, so happy you could all take a little bit more Zoom and stop by. Again, if you want to review this, we'll be sending it out later today. So don't worry if you missed a spot or want to go back to something in the presentation later. And a huge, huge thank you to all of our panelists. They really spearheaded planning this event and put it on. And I think it's such great content for all of our international students. So a huge, huge thank you for all of you for sharing your wisdom and for attending today. We'll go ahead and end the meeting now. So you can go ahead and leave the meeting whenever you're ready. Thanks so much, everyone.